these young adults were basically shared with, very similar to me, that their family was a hindrance to them pursuing the will of God. They were being manipulative, controlling, or restricting. I was kind of set as this example of, like, if you have any questions along this, you really should talk to Madison. I was being treated as if I was in some type of abusive home environment, wasn't safe within my own family. Jeremiah would apologize for my feelings in the situation, or how that could have hurt me, or how that could have, affected, or how I felt about it. He never acknowledged, when I said that about your parents, that was highly destructive to you as a 21-year-old, and for that, I am truly sorry. He never owned his actions.
Your average person stays in a cult 8 to 9 years, and then it takes several years to recover. And so I really did come to that place of acceptance. Okay, we're 4 years in, buckle up, keep the door open, just try to have a landing pad. But our relationship is still a little tenuous, so I say, may I hug you? And she says, yes. So I get up, I wrap my arms around her, and I just say, I'm here. I'm here. At this point, everybody's crying.
On today's episode of Speak Up, you're going to be shaken to your core. This is the tragic story of Madison Rollins, now Madison Dearey. Imagine this: a well-known national prophet moves into your region with great fanfare. You reach out to honor him, to welcome him, to bring him into your home. But within days, he begins reaching out to your daughter, speaking to her about her great destiny. He and his wife tell her, a young woman barely in her 20s, that she is the very reason that God sent them to North Carolina. What does a young woman do with such revelation? They begin to draw her in, to pull her closer, eventually inviting her to work for them. Then they persuade her to leave her parents' church without talking to her parents, who were the pastors, where she was a worship leader, and come serve as their worship leader. Over time, they encourage Madison to cut off all communication with her parents. What follows is devastating. Madison describes years of spiritual, emotional, and even physical torment, culminating in what could have been a near-death experience where no one on Jeremiah Johnson's team sought medical help. And imagine her parents, who spent their lives raising her, serving in ministry together as a family, only to watch their daughter leave them and refuse to even speak to them. Within Jeremiah Johnson's community, Madison became an example held up to others who were also being encouraged to sever ties with their families. Yes, that is cult-like behavior. Today, Madison shares her story along with her husband, Josiah Deary, ironically, the son of the pastors of Jeremiah Johnson's altar church, Chad and Krista Deary. And she is joined by her parents, now reconciled, Billy and Dana Rollins. I want to welcome all of you to a very somber and yet hopeful edition of Speak Up. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you guys are with us.
Hi, Ron.
Hello, Ron.
I really think that this is going to be a powerful broadcast, and I want to thank you, particularly you, Madison, for feeling safe to share your story, not merely with me, but with our audience. And like I said, I think this is going to minister to a lot of people. So I want to set things up. The Rollins family, you guys live in Salisbury, North Carolina. And tell me just a little bit about your life, your family. We're going back to 2019, 2020. What has your family been up until now?
Well, up until that time frame, our family, my daughter, Madison, is the oldest. We have 2 sons, Preston and Mason. And Preston is just under Madison, and then Mason is under Preston. All 5 of us have grown up, Dana and I are pastors. All 5 of us have grown up with a strong commitment to reconciling with one another, to telling the truth, to owning what we need to own, asking for forgiveness, just a very strong commitment to reconciliation. And then as they grew, they started actually getting involved in ministry work with us. Madison started leading worship at 8th grade at times in our church. Preston followed right with her. He's very gifted musically as well. Mason has a strong desire to minister to kids. So he's been in the kids ministry and was in the kids ministry for a long time, serving and ministering there. So as a team, And Dan and I have done family conferences. We've done, on top of being pastors, we just have always had a very strong commitment to family and the significance of being on mission with the Lord together, not in a way that would require them to do such things like that, but with their desire and them wanting to be involved in what we were doing. So it was a true blessing.
Yeah, that's a beautiful testimony. That's what, every parent wants. Certainly every parent in ministry, it's that's your dream.
Well, and please know, we're by far from any type of perfect family. I don't believe that exists, but I would say very functional. And so it was a joy and has been a joy. And I just want to say from the outset today, I am so thankful for where we are today, relationally and connected. And it just is very, very important and significant. And I'm very thankful for that today.
It's now, I guess, is it 2020? And Jeremiah Johnson, his wife Morgan, they have moved up to the Charlotte area and they have joined the Refuge Church, and you reach out to them. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we invited them to our home just to have dinner. We remembered what it was like when we moved into the area and the challenge of making relationships. And so we invited them into our home, had dinner with them here along with their kids. After dinner, Jeremiah kind of locked in on Madison. And when I say that, I just mean he began listening to her story, giving her a prophetic word, talking to her like that. Ron, I think it's important to know we really were not very familiar with the prophetic movement and prophets, and this was all new to us.
What were you told about Jeremiah and his ministry as they're coming in?
That they were coming to the area to unite the bride of Christ in the region for the return of Jesus. And they were going to do a ministry school. They were going to do revival nights, or I think they started out being called altar nights. And we were excited about that.
Yeah.
And we participated. So when Jeremiah began after dinner to talk to Madison, hear her story, and speak prophetically to her, we did. This wasn't familiar to us. So a national prophet is speaking to our daughter. The next day, though, Madison told us that Jeremiah had, I don't know if it was a phone call or a text message, but had reached out to her and said that after they left, he and Morgan, his wife, had talked, and that they believed that Madison was the reason they had moved into North Carolina.
Madison, what did that do to you? You're being told by somebody that is allegedly a national prophet, and with great fanfare, he has moved into the Charlotte region to unite the body, to prepare for the return of the Lord. And now him and his wife are saying, you are the reason that God moved us to Charlotte. That had to be a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, it was probably 50% blown away and just really honored to just be called up and out in that type of way, because I was, coming out of a ministry school, going through more of a season of hiddenness and just trying to be, faithful with where the Lord had me at an Amish market that I was working at. And then another 50% of me was like, holy cow, pressure, and was a bit afraid and kind of I don't quite know what to say to that. So I was honored again, but in the same turn was like, wow, I am 21. I don't really quite know what to say to that.
So in sharing this, that you are the reason that they came, more important, I would assume, than the reason that they've told everybody, which is to unite the body of Christ for the return of the Lord. Did they share this with your parents as well? How old are you at the time?
20.
You're 21. And did they share this with your parents?
No, they had messaged me or connected with me privately. It was a conversation I had with them. Yeah, privately.
So when Madison shared that with us, I think we probably felt the same. There was this 50% of, we know she's anointed. We know she's gifted. We know the call of God is on her life. So, of course, that was like, wow. And now it has been recognized. At the same time, there was this hesitation of, that's really a lot of pressure. How do you have a real choice in saying yes or no to that? Because the implication is if I say no, I'm disobeying God.
Yeah.
So we were concerned. But
this is a problem, by the way, in the prophetic world. Ultimately, God gives each believer the ability to say, I receive that or I don't receive that. I've talked to others who have come out of that same church who felt this incredible pressure that if a prophetic word is given, I have to believe that it's God.
100%.
But true spiritual maturity actually is being able to look at someone and say, thank you for that, but I don't bear witness to that.
Yeah.
But I do understand that feeling. I was very much like that as a young believer, where if someone, particularly someone who had the reputation to be a prophet, gave me a word, to say no is to say no to God.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So the next step in the process, Jeremiah ultimately asked Madison to be employed basically there with their ministry school, and then ultimately become the worship leader there at his church. So this was concerning to us because, number one, there was no conversation with us. We were her parents, we were her pastors. She was she was the worship leader every other weekend at our church, and she was also leading the female youth every Wednesday night. So there was this struggle of we're excited for her, but at the same time we felt like she had been recruited, and that was really challenging. And when we talked with Jeremiah about that, he basically said, well, she wasn't being paid by us, which I thought was just kind of an interesting response. Being paid is not the issue. It's the issue of honoring the ministry that she was doing there at her local church with her parents.
And also, Ron, just to give you some context, even after our initial concern with, him saying that Madison's the reason they moved here, we let that go. We were like, okay, this is how national prophets roll.
Yeah.
And we let that go. But we were including them into our home, into our church. We hosted holiday parties, Memorial Day, Labor Day. Their family would attend the campus of the refuge that we were responsible for, often. And so we felt like there was relational equity that could have, at least he would have spoken to us as her parents. So that was now a second pretty major red flag for us.
And in that process, we were very proud of Madison. She basically told us, she told us and she told Jeremiah and Morgan, she said, listen, I'm not going to accept this role until you guys get together with my parents. And so we had a meeting together, and we were very honest and shared with them, we felt like that was not wise, that was not thoughtful, considerate. And the meeting ultimately ended well. It was a little bumpy. There was a little tension flying here and there, but it ultimately did end well. And I thought, honestly, after that, okay, we're good now. We recognize that, the way it should be. We talked about it, cleared, and it's over.
Yeah. So this is a pattern. What we're really kind of explaining is a pattern that we saw really from 2021 all the way to 2023. But we had that meeting. We felt, okay, we're moving forward. By that August, Madison starts as the worship leader at the Art Fellowship, which is now Altar Church. And we were there. We showed up that Sunday. Our son Preston was also hired on part-time to work with her in the worship. These were our children.
Yeah.
We showed up. We were there that first Sunday. We blessed them. We blessed them from the church they were a part of. We had them in, honored them. We released them. But when Madison began working as the worship leader that August, she was still living at home this whole time. She began to struggle.
Yeah.
And our relationship was such that she would share with us and receive counsel and process. And so she would come home and just kind of share some struggles. It was I'll say a different flavor, a different style. And so she had questions and we would process. But probably the bigger thing is she was getting sick, and she had had some autoimmune issues before, but they were definitely escalating. And was concerned, and we were concerned. But when Madison went to explain to Jeremiah what was going on, our understanding of that was it was more blamed on the spiritual warfare that was going on within my husband and I and the ministry we were transitioning to. And then there began this communication that Madison probably needed to move out of her home.
Wow.
So then that's a massive red flag to us.
So just I want to recap here real quick. So what she was going through was blamed on you. You were the problem for whatever changes you're going through in spiritual warfare, and it was advised to her by Jeremiah, by the team there, that she should move out of the home. Who told you, Madison, that you need to get out of that house?
Jeremiah definitely was beginning to kind of communicate initially a little indirectly with his own thoughts, opinions, different things like that. He had a strong belief of, once you turn 18, that is really a time for you to kind of just go on your own, be an adult and fend for yourself. So he just kind of, soft launched his thoughts in that way. But as I continued to get sick, as I continued to wrestle, it definitely became more of I could tell he was more concerned and really felt like it was in my best interest to do that. And I wasn't just receiving that from him. It was from several other people in leadership as well. So I was getting it kind of on multiple fronts from leadership that I wasn't quite safe. Let me just go back for a second. So I'd spent about a year with Altar Global. I get asked to come on as the worship director for the church, which even and Jeremiah and Morgan asking me and sharing the news, they were really curious, to see how this was going to land and impact me. And I ended up, like Dad said, I wanted to take some time to pray just because I knew it was a weighty decision. It was going to dramatically impact my family. My family was launching a church at that time. And so, I knew that it was just kind of a fragile time within my family dynamic. So all 6 of us met just to talk through that decision. And eventually I ended up moving forward, with being the worship director. The timeline moved pretty quickly for me. My last Sunday service leading at Salisbury was like the last week of July. And then literally that next Sunday was the first week of altar. So it's a very quick turnaround. Had lots to prep for. Probably like a month or 2 into me being the worship director, there was a little bit of Jeremiah has big vision, big plans and different things like that. And he doesn't always quite know what goes into some of his planning. And so it kind of just became this thing where it was very much like, okay, we're going to do this event. I need a worship team. I need a full band. Let's just figure it out. And so there was some leeway at times, but for the most part, I just was under a lot of pressure. And then on top of that, I just had a lot of things going on physically. And sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, like the more that you worked and the more time went on, the sicker you got. Like
Yeah.
it got worse and worse continually since you joined staff.
Yeah, which going in, like I had dealt with different autoimmune issues even before coming to altar. So some of this wasn't new. It just really got exacerbated. Yeah, it got much worse. And so, obviously just within the church dynamic, the church plant starts and we're like 3, 4, sometimes 500 people on these services. And I'm like 21 years old, leading worship for the very first time as a worship director in such a large church. I'm like, what's the protocol here? Like, how do I do this? Just a lot of unknown, trying to figure out, trying to serve, the Lord well, leadership well, all the things. And so I was really wrestling because, up until this point in my life, like I had gone out to Bethel, my parents had blessed me and released me well. And I had never experienced a time in life where my parents weren't on the same page. We had disagreements before, but it ultimately landed with us being in some form of unity. Like we knew how to get to unity. And so this was really the first time in my life where we weren't on the same page. And they were really concerned for me as parents. And so there was a large part of me that was, still really honoring of that and like wow, like these are my parents and I trust what they say. I trust their perspective on my life. So in the same turn, I really felt like the Lord called me to be at altar as a worship leader. And so it was just a really intense tension internally that I was navigating. So I'm out with Jeremiah. I sat down and we were meeting one-on-one in his office and he was processing with me through some different things. I had some deeper questions about stuff going on with my family. And here is really whether it was intentional or unintentional on his end, was a pretty defining moment for me and some counsel that he gave. I was asking him just his thoughts on different things going on with my family. I'm just trying to make sense of, I feel like the Lord's called me here. Why is all of this happening? And Jeremiah pretty much shared with me, he said, Madison, I believe that your dad is operating out of a strong religious spirit that can at times manifest as controlling. I believe he got that from, his Baptist roots and kind of goes back. And then I believe your mom is operating out of a spirit of manipulation and control. And at times that can actually manifest as witchcraft. I'm sitting there.
Let me just stop here for a second. Dana and Billy, that is a Matthew 18 issue right there. Matthew 18 is typically abused and sometimes weaponized against victims when they should not be going to an unsafe person and confronting them. But you guys are friends, and now he's going to your daughter, and But did he ever come to you and say, Dana, Billy, I believe there's a religious spirit, there's a manipulation spirit?
Absolutely not.
No, no. And let me just clarify in this. There were two reasons why we were concerned. Number one, physically, she was getting sicker. Number two, she felt like in what she was communicating to us, she felt like that her identity as a worship leader was needing to change from what she was at our church, which was a little bit more subdued, a little bit more, would say reflective in her worship, more intimate, kind of like prayer room type setting versus almost like a militant type of worship style. So she felt like her identity was changing and she was getting sick. So that's why we were concerned.
Yeah.
We did not know that at the time. In fact, didn't even know until the past 6 months. I honestly that he had told her that we
Yeah.
had a religious spirit or was manipulative and controlling, but we sensed it.
We sensed it. And I knew something had happened because she and I got together for coffee and I attempted to connect heart to heart in conversation like we always had.
Yeah.
And I could see the fear in her eyes. I could see that she was unwilling to connect with me. And so then I got afraid. And fear does not bring out the best in any of us. So by now we are.
Let me jump back if I can to Madison in that conversation with Jeremiah. So he tells you that your parents are controlling, manipulative. What did that do to you?
It shattered me, honestly. I started crying pretty heavily. And again, because keep in mind, like, we grew up Baptist. So, like, just the whole spiritual demons, all of that, I had little to no reference point for. And so, and honestly, and just in my innocence and probably like lack of knowledge, when you say witchcraft, in my mind, that equals straight up witch. So, like, I'm thinking the absolute extremes. It totally sowed a large seed of fear in me that
Because you believed him.
Exactly. Because I was trying to make sense of my reality and nothing that I was experiencing was making sense. And so that seemed to be the most true. And so that conversation sowed a seed that actually created a large veil and divide between me and my parents that would go on for probably the next 2.5 to 3 years.
Yeah. Just, we could sense something terrible was unfolding, but we felt so alone and so isolated because everything else looked like this dynamic, wonderful ministry, but our daughter's not communicating to us. I think our fourth super red flag was in that process of Madison because she was still talking to us, but she was telling us, I think I'm going to move out. And she says, and Jeremiah, all the alarm bells are going off inside of me. I'm like, wait a minute, that you're not helping her become independent. You're helping her become dependent on you.
Yeah.
And that's not your place. And your firstborn child moving out of your home is a sacred moment. And for us, it was distorted and very painful.
Releasing your children, seeing that happen, dreaming of how that's going to happen, trying to be wise and loving in that process between raising and releasing your children is a very sacred thing. So we'd had many discussions about that, and we could not imagine that our daughter would be leaving under these types of circumstances. So if by Jeremiah telling her, well, you need to just get out of your house or you need to leave your house, that's one thing. But then wanting to provide financially above and beyond her salary, for me as a man, as a father, that was a pretty significant line. And if I'm really just honest, it was probably best that I not talk to him about just how upset I was about that as a father.
Madison, there's one key moment where Jeremiah says to a leader, I want to read it here, we need to get her out of that house. Explain that to me.
Yeah, there was a combination of things happening there. Primarily, which we spoke about, there was a level, when I started working for Altar, I was experiencing a level of demonic torment that I honestly had never experienced in my entire life. And once we got into the church context, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Large parts of my life were absolute nightmares. And I processed a lot of that with Jeremiah and Morgan. And as I processed it with them, a lot of that was, chalked up to When you start a church plant, there's a lot of warfare that goes around that. And so you're working for one church that just started. And then in the same turn, your parents are also trying to launch a ministry. And so it's like the warfare of two church plants combined, and you're right in the middle of it. There was a lot of suffering or challenge or heartache or torment demonically or spiritually that I was going through. I didn't realize it at the time, but it began to be a pattern that it was kind of everyone else's fault. My parents' refuge, first family, their church, anyone who was outside of the altar, it was their inflicting or their fault, but it was not the altar's. So really there was this narrative, spoken, unspoken, that the only place I was truly safe was at altar, which I will say in this, it's hard because, 21, 22, 23, I am in such a state of crisis. I really started to come underneath this thought process and reality. So I'm definitely not sharing from the perspective of, Jeremiah and Morgan forced me, but it was definitely a narrative that was slowly and subtly built that I began to adopt and believe for
Yeah,
myself.
forcing probably would not have worked. You probably wouldn't have responded
Yeah.
well to that. It was grooming. You were being lured, and the way you were groomed or lured, it's little by little, and it comes out of concern.
Yeah. Which was confusing for me because it felt like, to the degree that there was concern for me between whether it was the Johnsons or different people on leadership, the way that it was being treated, with me moving out, different things like that, it was as if well, let me backtrack. There was a mold component. I had a high allergy to mold that I was working through. And so I think part of that was potentially their concern for me health wise. But in some of the surrounding circumstances, it really just began to feel like I was being treated as if I was in some type of abusive home environment. I wasn't safe within my own family. So, shortly after, I really can't remember if it was before I moved out or after, but Jeremiah gave me a prophetic word. He's like, Madison, I see there being a severing and a cutting away for you, and that the Lord is moving you and transitioning you. And there's going to be a grafting into family. And this basically you're being grafted in, you're being hemmed in. It's like, and I'm hearing the scripture that talks about it, where it talks about he sets the lonely in family.
Can you remember Jeremiah ever giving you a prophecy where he had supernatural knowledge that there's no way he could have known that? Because in this situation, he knows he wants you to move. So giving you a prophetic word that I see the Lord moving you out, that's not supernatural. Now, if he suddenly said, I saw you yesterday in the spirit and you were at Walmart in aisle 8 and you were reaching for some frozen French fries and you're like, oh my gosh, I was doing that, that would be different. But
Yeah.
these are words that are meant to cause different behaviors to take place, leaving your house. But did he ever give you prophecies that there's no way he could have known?
Maybe when we first met, but to my recollection and being there, no. And I was actually kind of shocked at how I was really prophesied over once they first met me. But then once I got closer, it was like that kind of stopped. And it more became what you're picking up on, which is spiritualizing my circumstances and put it into this really high pressure, spiritualized kind of language and environment where it felt like it was like, I don't know how to describe it, but it just felt really big and weighty. And like it was something I didn't really have a choice in. It was something that was more happening to me because God wanted it that way. I don't know quite how to explain it. That's probably the best I could do. It became more like kind of like you're describing, where it's like, I feel like you're going to be separating, cutting away, transition, and a grafting in. And really what I kind of took that prophetic word to mean, and it was later said a little bit more plainly in different conversations, was that I was supposed to, in order to pursue fully the call of God in my life, I needed to separate myself from my family because they didn't understand and they were only going to be holding me back and hurting me. And that's where it talks about, leaving father, mother, sister, brother for the sake of the gospel. It was kind of what was used. And
Yeah.
so
And just to be clear, that is taking that passage out of context. There's the Matthew 10 passage, where he says, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. But that in context is talking about somebody coming to faith and their family not receiving that. And then there is, I think it's Mark 10, where it talks about leaving a father, mother for the sake of the gospel. It's about going overseas, going to another geographical location it's not talking about your family breaking up. It would be where you're hugging at the airport and you're crying and it's breaking your heart and your mom's heart, but you're going to Asia to share the gospel. It's not mom has is manipulative and dad is controlling and they're holding me back from my calling. That is not what that is. In fact, he had no authority to give you those words. And it angers me that somebody would, if we're talking about manipulative or a spirit of manipulation, that is exactly what he did.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, because, it really did feel like at that point, sacrifice was a big thing in the environment. What are you saying, like financially, relationally, different things. I laid it all on the altar of the Ark or the altar church or altar global. My relationship with my parents, soon after my relationship with my brothers, 15 years worth of relationship with people from Refuge, First Family, people that like watched me grow into being a worship leader, saw me graduate high school, like all of these people were no longer safe. And which we talked about, previous to this, it was like my
That's the
mom,
narrative.
that was the narrative. Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, that was the narrative.
That was the narrative. And yet he came to Charlotte with a word from God. If I remember correctly, he had a vision of Jesus telling him that you're going to unite the body of Christ for the second coming. So he's not uniting. He's actually, it appears he's dividing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ron, may I share this? Well, I could discern something was really wrong, but we weren't talking. Of course, she wasn't going to share those specifics with us because she knew how we would react.
Yeah.
Those specifics.
As far as your mom has a manipulative spirit, your
Yeah.
dad isn't, she wasn't going to share those details with us. She knew how we would react. And I feel for Madison. I can't imagine being in that level of confusion. But what that released in us as her parents, words have power, and careless words, the measure of spiritual warfare and grief that we entered into after that, after Madison moved out, was unlike anything. These last several years have been unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life. Normal grief, but grief mixed and mingled with torment, sleepless nights, too many to count, tears. It's been very challenging.
Yeah. And it's one thing for your daughter to be maturing and us being able to be a part and celebrate and release and encourage that. It's another thing to feel from your daughter in her mind. She did not tell us that Jeremiah had told her that, Madison, you're being severed from your parents. Had she told that and reattached, I mean, Dana's master's degree is in counseling. We're very committed to the, attachment theory of counseling. And we know the ramifications of being severed from that bond, that initial bond with their family. And that was just very, very significant and
Very
heartbreaking, very painful.
For our whole family.
Yeah, and it's not like you were holding on so tightly. You'd already sent her to California to go to Bible school, and now she's back. So I imagine if God's blessing was on this and it was processed as a family, you would have been thrilled for her to be. It didn't have to be in your church. It's the idea of they're cutting her off from her relationship with her parents, which is one of the most vital relationships. Even after we leave and cleave, we're still supposed to have friendship with our parents. One of my greatest joys in life is friendship with my adult daughters. And if I had gone through what you went through, it would have been devastating.
Yeah, and it
Wow.
was. So
well, actually, I want to what you're saying in regards to the leaving or the releasing adult children process. I had experience. I honestly think it was the kindness of God, like letting us have that experience. Me going up to Reading ministry school. So then to have this second experience where my parents were really trying to protect me. My parents' protection was interpreted as control and manipulation. And that's really important. And of course, like mom said, fear brings the worst out in us. Worry brings the worst out in us. So there were some times in dialogue and conversation where it was challenging and it got heated or it got intense. But the bottom line was every time I would process those conversations with leadership or different people with which looking back, I probably shouldn't have, their protection was always misconstrued into some form of manipulation or control to keep me from pursuing or calling that God had on my life. They were a large stumbling block for me. That was the
Yeah.
picture.
So you move out of your home. What happens next?
So, I move out, and shortly afterwards, I'm sure you're familiar, but me and my husband actually got really well acquainted with the Sanfords, because they moved here for the church plant. We became really good friends.
So that's Nathan and Mindy Sanford. Nathan is the son of Lauren Sanford, who is the son of the famous inner healing couple, the Sanfords. And so they had moved from Colorado to be part of Altar Church as well, or the Ark, correct?
Yeah, and we really became fast friends. If anyone who knows Nathan, he is just like a big teddy bear. He was incredibly friendly. Me and my husband, we weren't dating, honestly. We were friends, but we weren't dating or in any type of relationship at the time. But we both really just respected and honored Nathan.
Yeah.
Nathan he had a natural desire and passion to see people encounter the true gospel and the love of the Father and all of these things. And so that was his goal. He was discipling whether he was told to or not. It's just how he was
He
bent.
couldn't
And
help himself.
exactly, yeah. And honestly, especially in that environment, when Altar was planted, there was no pastoral leadership. And Jeremiah and Morgan have, communicated this in some of their regrets publicly. So there was no pastoral leadership and there was no teachers. It was strong prophetic and apostolic from their perspective leadership. So it left a lot of room. People weren't really getting discipled. They weren't really being taught the word or walked with. And so that left a huge gap in the church. Nathan never intentionally tried to start something because of the giftings on his life. He was naturally pursued by people.
Mhm.
And so he began to, we would ask to do Bible studies or different things like that for him to teach us the word or walk with us through things because Jeremiah would chime in on stuff. And then we were like, hey, we want to actually unpack that a little more. What are your thoughts? And so he would do these meetings and really would just teach people in homes, ask questions. It was a really healthy space to just learn. And so kind of shortly after that, we're growing in relationship and things like that. And I had this dream. And in this dream, it was right before a revival weekend. And I had a dream basically where I was in the altar sanctuary, but I was on the ground. And Jeremiah was up on the stage, and he basically was sharing that I would be leaving. I would be transitioning out of the church. And I was on the ground, like in kind of like the altar area, and all of the children at the altar began to line up and they were grieving and weeping, and I was embracing them one by one. And the dream ended. The only interpretation at the time that I had for that dream was that my time and season with the altar was up. I didn't quite understand the children piece was symbolic of. And so I had a meeting with Chad Deary. He was, beginning to step in as pastoral leadership or elder at the time, but hadn't quite stepped in fully yet. So we began to talk, and Chad, it was beautiful. We had a beautiful meeting. Chad was genuinely so sad because we had developed a friendship. I was his, admin at altar school before the church started. And so we had developed quite a relationship. And he was sad, gave me some pushback of like, do you really feel like you're hearing from the Lord? Do you really feel like this is the Lord? Which honestly, which we've communicated, that really wasn't probably the most encouraging thing for me to hear at the time, and was a pattern with leadership of like, are you sure you heard from the Lord? Are you sure that was?
So it's a prophetic community where people are being trained to hear from the Lord, but your experience is that if you heard something from the Lord that didn't fit the narrative or the program for their ministry, then you would be challenged. Did you really hear from God? Do you really think you can hear from God? Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, and especially if it regarded leaving or stepping down from your role in ministry or whatever.
That was important.
Yeah, if it was about getting more involved, that was never really challenged.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're not healthy at this time, Madison. So it's everything's going great, and you're having a dream to leave. Things are not going well, at least physically, and so it may have made sense to have a change of scenery.
So let me jump back again a little bit. So, before I moved out, I began to meet with a doctor that I found in Charlotte that was recommended to me by some friends at the church. And we're spending, thousands of dollars in tests and things, just trying to figure out. I had developed heart palpitations, horrible joint and body pain. I felt like I was 100 years old. Like I couldn't bend or move certain days. I was in pain constantly, all day, every day. Some days would sleep 15 to 18 hours. No sleep was enough sleep. I could go on and on symptom wise, chronic fatigue, all the things. But basically, I had a laundry list of autoimmune stuff. going on. So I sat with this doctor, me and my mom went, and we started doing all of these different tests and come back a few weeks later. And the doctor's looking at my charts. So I did a saliva test, for endocrine things and stuff. So he's basically the first thing he wanted to check was my cortisol. And he's looking at my charts and he shows me my charts and he's like, I'm going to be honest. In my entire practice as a doctor, I have never seen cortisol levels so high. Only how old again? And I was like, I'm 21. He said, you should not. Cortisol is the stress hormone, if you don't know what
Right.
that is.
Cortisol is if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're just wide awake and you can't go back to sleep. That's
Yeah.
cortisol. You're thinking about all these horrible things that might happen. It's not your fun chemical in the body.
No. And, cortisol is supposed to rise in the morning when we wake up, and then it eventually, plateaus, and then, of course, dips so that we can go to bed and stuff like that. My cortisol was at skyrocket levels, high, all of the time. It never came down. And he was concerned. My doctor was concerned for me. He was like, there's different things that we can do supplementally. He's like, but may I ask, what is your job? And I told him, I was like, I'm a worship leader for this church plant. And he kind of laughed a little bit, but was like kind of laughing, but pretty serious at the same time. He was like, he's like, you may want to reconsider joining a more sedentary church. He's like, if you tried the Methodists, and me and mom just started laughing, and we're like, wow.
I was secretly saying, yes, amen.
But, he would go on to give me all of these supplements and things like that. We're trying to figure out what's going on. But the bottom line was, that was in October, November that we're meeting. By December, nothing that he was giving me was working. And I was actually so sick that I spent the entire month of December bedridden and would sleep 6 days a week and then would lead worship on Sundays. And that became my life. And Jeremiah and Maureen were aware of this. They actually, they offered to pay for me to, recover and then just do my thing on Sundays, which, at the time I interpreted as generosity. I think hindsight, looking back, I really wish someone would have come alongside me as a 21-year-old and said, hey, God actually doesn't need you this badly for you to sacrifice your health on the altar of someone else's ministry. Because and no one was holding a gun to my head. I was an adult. I totally could have made that decision. But, I entrusted my life, my health, my walk with the Lord. Like I was underneath Jeremiah Morgan's covering. And I was assuming and trusting that I was safe underneath that.
And what did he say to you after you told him
Oh,
the
yeah.
medical report?
I told, so I of course, filled Jeremiah Morgan in. Thank you. And in regards to, what my doctor said, and Jeremiah kind of laughed and was like, yeah, I don't really like your doctor. Sounds like you need a new one.
And what's his medical background again?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. And I'm not bringing that up to just be mocking. It's a very serious thing.
Yeah.
If he's just your buddy, if he's your friend from school and he says, I don't like that diagnosis, it's no big deal. But when you're coming in and you're telling everybody you're a prophet, you're an apostle, you're hearing from God, you're seeing Jesus, he's coming into your room, your angels are coming into your room. And then that person says to you, I don't like that diagnosis. It carries much more weight.
It
Right.
does. So going back to what I was sharing, I have this dream I'm processing with Chad. Chad connects with Jeremiah. Jeremiah was in Brazil at the time. And so he flies back and then we have a meeting literally the next day. And I remember walking through the property on the phone with my mom and I was sharing and I was literally in tears and I was like, Mom, I feel so free. I don't know why. I feel so free. Like I'm finally going to quit. Like
the direct quote was, I have not felt this much relief in 2 years.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, we're praying. Just call us when the meeting is over.
And so I was
Dana,
so
you must have been happy at that point.
Yes. Yes, I was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is what year? This is December or is this now in the new year?
January, February, kind of
23.
2023. Thank you, babe.
2023. So that would be 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So tell me about that meeting.
Yeah. So I went in, excited and a little nervous. And I remember sitting down, in the cabin with Jeremiah and Maureen and sharing with them the dream. Just a little bit of context. The current temperature or environment going on at the church was very intense. Lots of warfare. I can't remember if Jeremiah was facing accusations or something at that time, but there was a lot going on. And it was, just really tense. You had a lot of people having a lot of different dreams and leadership was not very stoked. And so I sat in the meeting and I shared my dream and I'm like, and so I really feel like I'm supposed to take a step down. I feel like, my season at, the altar is coming to, or arc at the time, is coming to a close.
So I just want to let people know the reason we keep saying ark and altar is that the church was originally called the Ark, and then at a certain point it changed its name to Altar Church, the Altar Church.
Hmm. Yeah, and so, I'm sharing with Jeremiah Morgan, and Jeremiah asked, he's like, "Do you want our feedback, or do you just want us to listen?" And I said, I'd love your feedback. Again, I'm trusting oldest child, desiring to please leadership. Like, I'm just trying to go about it the best way I can. And so Jeremiah started giving me feedback, and he basically said, he's like, "Well," he was like, "in regards to this dream that you've had, I believe it is demonic. I do not believe it's from the Lord. I believe that it was a dream that was sown demonically in the night. There will be a time that we will release you, but tonight, this is not the time."
Yeah, and I was meeting with Nathan Sanford here and there at that time as well, and we're going to these Bible study meetings just to hear actual teaching of the word, actual like scriptural exposition, and I was really benefiting a lot. It was really impacting my personal walk with the Lord, and I had some big decisions about leaving the altar or the church at that time and doing what I was like calling me to do, and I was discussing those things with Nathan, and I had my own also conversation with my dad, Chad Deary, saying that like, "Hey, I would really recommend you don't talk to Nathan anymore. Stay away. He's dangerous. He's trying to, pull people away from the church, or he's hurting people." And it was like, again, like it's just the same as her. It was super confusing because it was like I had
Yeah.
never experienced that. I'd only experienced good experiences with
Yeah.
Nathan Sanford.
Yeah. It was really heartbreaking. Like, he really had a heart for especially the young adults. And our perspective of Nathan was immediately attacked by leadership, which caused, I would agree. I think there was some type of, whether it was, in Jeremiah's leadership or Deary's or whatever, I think they felt threatened by Nathan personally. And there had to be some type of narrative that was created in order to dramatically separate people from his influence. And so after that meeting, I was encouraged by leadership to stop communication with my parents because that was confusing me. And I was encouraged to not communicate with Nathan or Mindy Sanford at all. After the meeting with Jeremiah and Morgan, I ran to the bathroom in the other building, and I laid on the tile floor and had a 45-minute long panic attack. I was so horribly dysregulated and confused and honestly traumatized of like trying to process through what they're saying about Nathan, trying to process through, I guess I don't hear from God. And in the same turn, deep down, I felt trapped. I felt trapped by leadership of just like, I can't discern when my timeline at altar is up. The Lord, apparently only Jeremiah knows when my timeline is up.
So the people that you felt safe around, initially, your parents, they're being removed. Then you meet Nathan and Mindy and you feel safe around them. They're being slandered. And the people that you don't feel safe around, that every time you're around them, there is anxiety and stress, you're being gaslit by them, telling them that you don't hear from God and you need to stay with us.
100%.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I said this earlier, but everyone that wasn't in the leadership circle of the altar was not safe. I was even having dreams at the time where I was in this house and like there were alligators outside and they were charging at me and attacking me. And as long as I was in the house, I was safe. I would process these dreams with, different leadership or even with Jeremiah and Morgan themselves. And their interpretations of the dreams were as long as I stayed inside of the altar, as long as I stayed inside the church, I was safe. But anything outside was impacting me, which going back, honestly, like a church is not a home. I believe that was symbolic of my parents' house, that the Lord was trying
Absolutely.
me, that I was safe within the covering of my parents' home, and that everywhere outside of that, there were some high level, demonic things operating and really trying to harm me and attack me.
Yeah, that's the common sense interpretation. And
Yeah.
then to
Well,
Yeah.
and Ron, we're hearing this. I'm hearing this dream for the first time, like
Yeah.
as she's sharing it right now, because when
wow.
when Madison had the meeting with Jeremiah and told her about her dream, and he said it was demonic, we were waiting for her call that the meeting was over,
Yeah.
and hours went by, no phone call. Finally, that afternoon, I called her. I'm like, "Well, how did it go?" And she said, Well, Jeremiah said my dream was demonic and that there would be a time that he would release me, but that time wasn't now. And Ron, I cannot describe to you what happened inside of me. Death. It was death.
And it was a little bit after that, just a few days after that, Madison called me and he says, Dad, I need to share what's going on with you. And I asked her, do you want me to listen? Do you want feedback as well? She said, please, I need your feedback as well. So she explained what had happened between Jeremiah and Nathan and all of that. And I said, so let me talk to you as your father now. I said, the reason why this is so significant, sweetie, is because I know your heart and I know it's very important in how you were raised for you to walk barrier free, life giving with the people in your life. So she went back and basically talked with Chad and with Jeremiah the next day. She told them about our conversation, and their response was, you don't need to be talking to your parents anymore. You don't need to be talking to Nathan anymore.
And it may not have been said that harshly, but it was couched in all of these conversations are opening you up to confusion, Madison.
Yeah.
So for the sake of your own health, for the sake of your own, peace, limit who you're talking to. So it was, I'm sure it wasn't quite that blunt.
Yeah.
That was the
and let me say,
implication, though.
from that point forward, it was months before we ever heard a word from our daughter again.
Wow.
And it was from that point forward that we lost any influence.
Yes.
Like our voice
at all.
from that point forward, April, like 2023, mid-April, mid-2023, or voice of counsel, or from 23 into 24 for us was an incredibly difficult time. So when this happened and our son Preston left, he thought Madison was leaving too. So when he left and she didn't leave, it was very significantly, very, very much impacted their relationship. Then you have our son Mason, who's trying to make sense of what's happening in his family. He's in his senior year and right out of school. It was awful. That year alone, 2024, we spent thousands, almost $6,000 in therapy for ourselves, for each one of our children, and I would spend it again. We were just trying to understand what had happened to us and what had happened to our family. Yeah. And even with all of that, we couldn't find our way back.
So, Billy, is it around that time that you wrote a letter to Jeremiah?
Yes. So I had talked with Jeremiah just privately about a couple of issues. And then this was when we talked in the initial stage of our relationship. And then we had that sit down with him in Morgan. But there was a period of time, once all this started unfolding, I wasn't connecting well with my daughter now, and I was really frustrated. So when these months took place, finally, I'm like, okay, I've just got to get down. I spent a solid week. And when I say solid week, I don't know how many hours I poured into this letter, but it was basically like a 5.5, 6-page letter outlining what had taken place in a way of, this is what happened. This is what you said. This is what you did according to what I've seen, or this is what my daughter said. This is what we have a real challenge with. So I sent that to him. And for how many weeks?
I think it was 3 weeks later, Jeremiah responded back to us. Now, when Billy sent that letter, he also sent it via email. Michael Brown saw it as Jeremiah's overseer, and Bob Gladstone, because this is around that same time where local leadership is confronting Jeremiah on other things.
Yeah.
And we were invited, Billy was invited to be part of that confrontation. And the only reason he did not do it was because Madison was still on staff and the relationship was fragile. We did not know how that would go down. We didn't want to do anything to make it worse. But Jeremiah did respond to us via email back to everyone about 3 weeks later. It was maybe 4 paragraphs. We had requested to sit down with a neutral third party to help us get to reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And he said, unfortunately, we don't see fruit or the benefit of answering each one of your points because we see them so differently. Expressed his love for Madison. Probably the line in the response that was a bit of a gut punch. He said, from everything Madison has shared with us, if you would have simply blessed her decision to serve with us at the Ark, there would be nothing to get in the way of her relationship with you. So all that our family had been through was blamed on us.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was
I also
challenging.
see he wrote, over the last 2 years, we have watched Madison blossom, grow in emotional and spiritual maturity, and are so proud of her. It is a true honor and privilege to watch the Holy Spirit use her in incredible ways, and I'm sure we can all agree that Madison is an amazing young woman full of integrity, humility, and passion for Jesus. The concern here is that she is suffering. She is, the way he writes that is if life is perfect for Madison, but it's
Well,
getting worse and worse, at least up until this point in the story, from the time
100%.
she has joined with Jeremiah and Morgan, and now the altar church. Life is getting harder and harder. She's going to doctors. So maybe she is growing, maybe she is maturing. And that part, yeah, I will agree with that. But she is not happy. She's not enjoying life, but he's not telling you that.
No. Yeah. No, I saw 3 different doctors. No one was able to help. We probably within the first 2 to 3 years easily spent about $10,000 in different forms of, supplements, doctor's appointments, lab tests, just trying to figure out what's going on. So $10,000 in health, $6,000 in therapy. Like it's been an expensive last few years.
In this letter that you sent, the initial letter, you're asking for a meeting with a third-party mediator. And he is saying, no, we're not going to do that. We don't see a need for that. So your daughter, who is in her early 20s, has left your covering. She's left your church. She's gone to work for them. Now they've told her, don't talk to your parents anymore. And yet he doesn't see the need for a third party to come in and try and bring some, I don't want to say reconciliation, some understanding into what in the world are they doing to your daughter. You guys are super patient in this situation. I know your hearts were broken during this time, but he's acting like he's the protector when from everything I can see, he's the root issue.
Yeah, for the first year and a half or so, we didn't even share any of this with our elders at our church because we were still trying to get over this, the benefit of the doubt. We were trying to wade through, have we done something wrong? We didn't have clarity about this issue. By the time we wrote that letter, there was more clarity. But I want to say, and I believe my wife will chime right in, the morning that we received Jeremiah's response, basically saying, no, I'm not going to do the Matthew 18 process with you. We were at a conference and we were about to go into lunch and there was this guy on stage, a prophetic voice, basically saying, before we go to lunch, there's a guy right over here. And he started pointing towards me. I did not want to be pointed out. I'm like,
We did not want prophetic word.
No, that's the absolute last thing that I wanted. But I was looking around. He said, no, the one that's looking around, he said, you. And basically he gave a prophetic word.
I just would like to read it. He said to my husband, I see the Lord beginning to recalibrate you right now. I see a young lady, the Lord bringing life, liberty, and revelation, eyes opening, and it is well. And God is taking care of you right now in Jesus' name. This was August the 2nd, 2024.
Yes, but we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves yet.
Yes.
Spoiler alert, they are reconciled. They're sitting on the couch together. But this is now late summer 2024. And this is when, if I remember correctly, this is when Bob Gladstone and others are having these meetings with Jeremiah. Dr. Brown is defending Jeremiah, which, based on everything you told me, I don't understand how. So take me further in this story.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify, we did go and talk with Dr. Michael Brown, who was seen as Jeremiah's overseer in this process. So we went to his office. It was him and his wife, Nancy. The 4 of us sat down together and we started like I started with you. We basically explained, we had him over for dinner. Family came in. We had a wonderful time. The next day he calls our daughter, says, you're the reason why we moved here. And immediately when we said that, Nancy kind of chimed in and said, Michael Brown's wife, and said, well, how do you know Madison's telling the truth? I'm like, I was honestly just kind of shocked. Like,
and I said, well, because she's continued to say that and her story hasn't changed. And it's been 3 or 4 years now. And she's upset with.
And they took her into employment and moved her out of her house, cut her off from her family. So it would seem that that is confirmed.
Obviously, from the very get-go, we felt like, okay, they're listening to us, but they're already on Jeremiah's side. that's why when I wrote the letter, I'm like, okay, we need a third party. And Dr. Brown and I went back and forth on text messages, him wanting to be the third party. And I'm like, Dr. Brown, respectfully, I need somebody in this situation that I don't know and that you don't know and that Jeremiah doesn't know, but who's experienced it doing something like this.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I don't want to hit against this buddy system.
Wow. So Madison, you continue. You're now not talking to your parents, and you are working at the Ark, or rather the altar church. Does anything get better?
No. My health continued to decline. It would ebb and flow, but even in the ebb and flow, it wasn't like, oh, I'm getting better. Just kidding, I'm going back. Like, it continued to decline. Chad had been in leadership for the last few months since Nathan left, and so Jeremiah kind of came back in and took control and charge over everything again. And so Jeremiah was leading staff meetings, and I began to, in these staff meetings, there was a measure of excitement for me, in the meeting and different things like that. And we would go into staff meetings and Jeremiah would start talking and I would start going into panic attacks. I would leave the staff meeting, go into the bathroom and cry and shake, sometimes for 30, 45 minutes, an hour at a time. Morgan was aware of this. Like I would text her and share with her what was going on. Like through all of my health, things that I had going on, Morgan and Jeremiah were very aware because I was trying to find relief, but they didn't know how to help me. It was just the bottom line.
Yeah, so I had met Madison right away when I moved to North Carolina, but I'm the oldest son of Chad and Krista Deary, who are others at the altar. At least my dad is. And yeah, so I had gotten close to Billy and Dana and their family like right away when we first moved here. I remember like being invited to their house several times and being close friends or good friends with her younger brothers. We would work together or just spend time here at their home hanging out. Yeah, didn't really know too much behind the scenes about all the other stuff. But yeah, that was how we got connected. Through being on staff at the church and being involved at the altar, really continued to grow close to Madison as a friend. Now that I'm at this point, I really feel like she's obviously now we're married. A big reason why the Lord brought me out here to North Carolina. But we had always had a really good friendship, and at a certain point, I was offered a job to be on staff there, and we got closer at that time too. Eventually started dating, and when all this started happening in 2024, we were just a couple of months into our dating relationship at the time. So yeah. Yeah, so when my parents moved down here in the fall of 21, I was told by them specifically that there's a whole plan the whole time to start a church in the future, and this is before the building that they're in now is ever given to them. And so the narrative that was publicly spoken is that they were not the Lord told them not to start a church, but then when the people who gave them the building that they're in now gave them this building for free, that it was clear, okay, the Lord is saying to start a church. And really behind the scenes, they were planning on starting a church that whole time. And it was stuff that I was told to me before the building was ever.
So is it fair to say, Jeremiah comes to Charlotte and he says, God told me not to plant a church. He becomes a member or begins to go to Refuge Church, starts holding monthly revival meetings. But I think you said it earlier, Josiah, that when he was given a building, he said that's when the Lord told him to start a church. But you're saying, no, he actually had been planning that for some time before then.
Yeah, he definitely had been planning that sometime before. I remember as early as August or September of 2021, my parents would tell me about inner conversations that they would have with Jeremiah about the future plans of starting a church before the building was ever given.
Right. And again, I just want to be clear to everyone. Everyone was told when the building was given that this was God saying, are
Correct.
to plant a church, when in fact this was in their hearts before then.
Yes, much longer.
So Dana and Billy, as pastors in the refuge system, did Jeremiah end up taking people from that congregation to start this new church?
Yes, several people left the Refuge Kannapolis campus, a few from our campus, the Refuge
Yeah.
Salisbury. And there had been kind of this growing tension between the altar and the refuge. Not so much on the refuge part but Jeremiah's messaging was that there were religious strongholds in the region. And really it was like they were praying and mandating that these religious spirits come down. But some of his messaging implied that it was churches like the Refuge and around that were doing this. And so that created tension and division. And so it was really fertile ground for people to want to buy into this larger vision, this better,
Yeah.
this
Totally.
something better, something greater. And it was icky.
Everyone else who was told that they were planning on starting a church, that Jeremiah was planning on starting a church, we were all told, hey, don't say anything, don't tell anyone, but Jeremiah is planning a church. And so when when it got announced, hey, we've been given this building, everyone's telling me like, oh my gosh, this is what a surprise. And I'm like, this isn't a surprise. I've known about this for like 6 months at least.
Yeah. So the two things that I communicated with Jeremiah in this process, once I started hearing what his message was on the altar nights at the refuge, which Pastor Jay Stewart gave him one night a month for 6 months, free of charge, to come in and hold his meetings. And it was on the platform that he was insinuating, like Dana was saying, he wouldn't say directly the refuge church. He's much smarter than that. But he would say things like, churches with, where you have multiple services and things are on a clock and you got to move out and which described what the refuge was doing. So I went to him and I'm like, bro, just say that and recognize you're insinuating that's what the refuge is doing. And then he would go online and distinguish between Saul and David and how basically Saul was mistreating David. I'm like, so behind the scenes, who's talking with you? Like who's being Saul in your life? He said, look, no one in particular. I'm like, then why are you portraying it on Facebook as though there is someone? So that those two things were very confusing.
So people were picking up on that, and they were
Yeah.
thinking that he was referring to the senior pastor at the Refuge Church as Saul, and he was David. He wouldn't use those names, but that's what people were thinking.
No one was saying that out loud. No one was saying that out loud. That's why I'm like, I was picking up on it, and that's why I asked him privately. And he was like, no, I'm not saying anyone in particular. He says, if they take it personal, that's on them. So
Yeah,
So-
he would absolutely deny that. And that's really hard to prove. But our perception was there was enough language going on that it was creating an us and them atmosphere.
I think the other thing in terms of relationship with pastors in the area that's significant to realize, I went to him one day, we were in his office, and basically I said, so Jeremiah, recognize, there are several churches represented in this first year of your ministry school, but the Salisbury campus, which is where we pastored of the Refuge Church, there are probably, and I said, there are probably more people from this small campus than from any other church, including the main campus from Kannapolis. I said, here's my question to you. When these people graduate in a year from this ministry school, as a pastor, how do I steward and leverage like what they're getting here? How can we steward that best in our local church? Because this is all for the goal of unifying and strengthening the local church body. And he says, oh, I don't have time for that. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, yeah, to clarify that to pastors, I don't have time for that. I said, well, what if you just delegate that to somebody? And his same response, I don't have time for that. So that was disappointing, but still in that process, I didn't have, fortitude or whatever to say, okay, this is just wrong, because I still believe, okay, this is a good thing. We had a lot of people from our campus at the church, but initially it was confusing for being a local pastor and experiencing this
Right.
process.
So that was years before. Now we're going to catch back up. It's the end of the summer, 2024. Madison, take us along in the story. How are you doing health-wise at that time? I know that you were having some spiritual issues as well.
Yeah. So the demonic torment dreams that I would and encounters and experiences within the church, those continued. And health wise, those, there was a continued decline there as well. But with the pace of the environment, I just kind of kept going. You don't really have time to take, personal inventory of what's going on. You kind of just have to keep up with, whatever's on the schedule. Chad and Krista were set as elders and as, the pastors. So this really was Chad and Krista's ministry to run with and to do what, they had in their hearts. And then by the time that this 2-year anniversary rolls around, everything was merged and it was back in the hands of Jeremiah to kind of take over. As a staff member, personally, that was incredibly there was part of me that was excited at the time, and then in the same turn, it was incredibly hard to watch simply because, Chad was removed from his place of influence and authority, and watching that letting go and grieving process for him as his friend was incredibly devastating. We have these staff meetings and continue to move forward, and Jeremiah is running these staff meetings. Well, a few staff meetings in, I start to have panic attacks. In these panic attacks, Jeremiah would share different things or say different things, and I couldn't really pinpoint what was causing the panic attacks. The only common thread I could pick up on is that it was coming from things that Jeremiah would say or do or share, and I would get up out of staff meeting, go to the bathroom, and hysterically cry, shake, and yeah, that was a whole experience, which I informed Morgan in on, and Jeremiah, I believe, was aware to a degree as well. But, you know, again, there just wasn't a lot of understanding as to how to help me in what I was navigating. And so I do want to share during this time, we had a time where Jeremiah was standing different staff members up because with the merge, we were all trying to, like get to know each other and share more honestly and things like that. And I got up and began to share my story of just how I, met Jeremiah Morgan, how I got to be where I am. Really, because at the time I'm under the narrative and understanding the group think, if you will, of my story with my family. And so I'm just sharing from that perspective, what I've been told. I kind of got to the parts, where I cut off relationship with my family and begin to cry. It's just a highly emotional, situation that I'm communicating. And I pretty much said, I have given up everything to be here. It was incredibly painful and challenging. And, Jeremiah got up and there was a level of applauding. Jeremiah really honored me in front of the whole staff for how much I've sacrificed, and that as a church, they are benefiters of my sacrifice due to, the anointed and powerful worship that comes in and Sunday in and Sunday out, and that they're grateful for all that I've given up to be here.
You had also shared with me that you were held up as an example to others, that there were, I don't know, 8 others that were being encouraged to break off communication with their family members.
Yeah, so other families started to experience very similar patterns. And I don't know the ins and outs of some of these family stories, but the patterns that I, just began to pick up was the parents were having some disagreements or caution or concern around what they were experiencing with their young adult kids. Very similar process to my parents in releasing adult children. And then whether it was through the elder team or through Jeremiah, and these young adults were basically shared with very similar to me that their family was a hindrance to them pursuing the will of God. They were being manipulative, controlling, or restricting. And so I was kind of set as this example of like, if you have any questions along this, you really should talk to Madison,
But at a certain point, this is starting to look like a cult. Maybe that doctrine was okay, I don't know. But in terms of the control that over people's lives, suggesting that people aren't hearing from God if it doesn't line up with the narrative of the church, not, I will release you in the future, but not now, kind of takes away your agency over your own life.
100%.
Yeah. So, Ron, if I could interject, once Madison really cut us and the communication was, via text every now and then, we would get together for special occasions. We were spending this money in counseling to even just attempt to build a bridge back to one another. My husband and I met with multiple therapists. And I read all the books and watched all the documentaries. Months and months into this, we had to sit with ourselves, my husband and I, and say, okay, we've had 5 mental health professionals say to us, our daughter is in a high control group. And that means we can't communicate with her like you normally would, because whatever you say against the leader is very much twisted and it pushes them deeper in because they have been conditioned to see you on the outside as unsafe, but the inside is safe. And Madison would even say those words. She would say to us, you guys are unsafe. We were like, what in the world? I remember one night we were here trying to connect and she said, I'm actually having a hard time remembering anything good from my childhood. And I was devastated.
Wow.
her history is being rewritten because that's just not true.
Let me read you a definition of a high control group. A high control group, often referred to as a cult, is an organization or community that demands absolute loyalty, restricting individual autonomy through psychological manipulation, social isolation, and strict conformity. These groups use manipulative tactics, behavioral, information, thought, and emotional control to maintain power and limit free choice. Now, of the several hundred people that go there, I'm sure that is not everybody's experience. I imagine, I've never been there, but there's probably people that go there every Sunday and their experience is not a cult or a high control. But for some of you in that inner circle, would you say it was?
100%.
Yes.
Yeah. And let me say to that, Ron, one of the things that was very difficult for us, Dana and I, to process is that, just like you said, there are people and were people whose experience was not like ours. And it really took us a while to recognize that two things can be true at the same time. It
Yeah.
can be one thing for us and something totally different from somebody else. And it doesn't diminish what we're going through. And it doesn't necessarily invalidate
Right.
the other that good that someone else is experiencing.
Yeah.
That was very confusing,
Very
but
confusing.
I'm glad ultimately we came to that realization.
Yeah.
I will say this, once we came to the point of acceptance that this is our reality, I had done the research. Your average person stays in the cult 8 to 9 years, and then it takes several years to recover. And so I really did come to that place of acceptance. Okay, we're 4 years in, buckle up, keep the door open, just try to have a landing pad for relationship at whatever degree we can have. That was a very hard place to finally arrive. But when I could get there, I think I could begin to heal emotionally myself.
In 2024, I think you received a scripture that gave you hope. Explain that to me.
I had felt the Lord invite me to spend the night in the prayer room, our prayer room at church. And so I went and I took my Bible, I prayed, I read scripture, I worshiped, I did all the things. And I was listening to something, and the person quoted a verse in Isaiah. And I asked the Lord, I begged the Lord, I said, if I can have this verse to be mine, my anchor, my word from you, will you please have somebody say it to me or send it to me directly? And I will receive it as if it's from you. So that was a Monday. And 48 hours later, I got up that Wednesday morning. We actually had a pretty significant counseling appointment set up with Madison and Josiah. And I looked in my phone, and a friend of mine said, hey, this verse popped up in my spirit today for you. I knew I was supposed to send it to you. And it was the verse that I'd asked the Lord for. And here's what it is, Isaiah 49:20. But this is what the Lord says, even the captives of the mighty will be taken away, and the plunder of the tyrant will be retrieved. For I will contend with those who contend with you, and your children I will save. I wrote that verse. I put it in my car. I put it in my kitchen window. I put it on my bathroom window. And I said, and I will hold here, Lord, until this comes to pass.
Wow. That's beautiful. So you are hanging on, and now we're into the fall of 2024. Madison, what's going on now?
So, at the time I was meeting with a counselor, I was meeting with the boxes, and I was meeting with a BWRT specialist, and that basically stands for brain wave recursive therapy. I was explaining to the boxes that I was having some
So
form.
just tell everybody who are the boxes?
Yeah. So Steve and Lorraine Box, they attended the altar. And at the time when we were there, they were life coaches. If you needed counseling, all elder leadership was sending you to the boxes. They were like the church counselors.
Okay.
And they had come out from Bethel, so we were able to bond over that because of my season out at Bethel. And, I started meeting with Lorraine and sharing some of these experiences, dreams and stuff that I was having. And she was like, I really think you would benefit from some form of trauma therapy. And she recommended to me BWRT. And so I started doing it. I wish BWRT would have maybe had a little bit more of a warning label. But just because my experience in it was pretty intense. When you do it, you have to commit to it for 6 weeks. And you have to do it back to back to back. If you leave sessions too kind of far in between, it could potentially trigger some physical abreactions, which I didn't know. And so, our family, fast forward to Christmas time, our family goes to Disney for Christmas. And, tension is high. Of course, our family loved each other and we had found some form of communication, but it was just incredibly hard still to be around each other and to really actually communicate and enjoy being together. Which for all three of us, and honestly, probably especially for the boys, was just so confusing because we had 21 plus years of that not being the case. We go to Disney, we're going throughout the parks, and we sit down to watch this fireworks show. And all of a sudden, the pain starts surging more intensely throughout my legs, and I can't feel my legs. They're such horrific pain. And a thought crosses through my mind, and the thought was, I want to tell mom that I'm in pain, but I can't, because if I do, she's going to blame my pain on Jeremiah. And as soon as that thought crossed through my mind, I kind of collapsed into my mom's arms and started crying pretty intensely and was just in a horrific amount of pain and truly felt paralyzed in an emotional and physical sense. So what I didn't know at the time is I was having an abreaction, which is where the body responds to a memory of a physical or emotional trauma. And so my brothers are having to carry me out of this epicenter, up these stairs in front of, hundreds of people. And then the Disney team ends up giving us a wheelchair, and I get wheelchaired out of Disney by my family. We're in the car and, driving back to the hotel. My brother had to help walk me back to my hotel room. It just was, everything about it was very intense and very scary. I had what I didn't know at the time is I was experiencing micro seizures at night, honestly, and I don't blame this on anyone. I think it was just in being in a highly spiritual environment. I just assumed I was encountering the Lord or something, honestly, when I would shake and have these micro seizures, but come to find out they were genuine, medical micro seizures. There was nothing, honestly, very spiritual about them. I end up going to meet with Lorraine. At this point, I've not met with the doctor. I'm just scared. I'm trying to figure out what's happening to me. And I went and met with them. I was sharing what was going on at Disney. We were catching up and what happened to me physically. And I was sharing with her that I feel like the Lord has told me that I need to quit for health reasons. And I'm about to be literally, it was December. We were getting married in March. I'm sitting here thinking my health can't tank now. I want to be healthy and be able to walk down the aisle, all of these things.
Right.
I was doing that, and kind of in tandem, I was really wrestling through different things within, just as a staff member, things that I was seeing that Jeremiah would be preaching from the platform or sharing it publicly. And I was just wrestling and processing through those things with her. One of those things, was Jeremiah's on stage talking about how these conferences and events are for people and would kind of really encourage people to invite their friends. This is for, the region, and put a strong emphasis on these things. I mean, I'm leading worship for these events. I'm literally seeing on the stage, I'm watching people get ministered to, and I'm like, I'm sorry, but I don't see how any of these services are for people. I don't see long-term, impactful, sustainable change and transformation in people's lives. And I was just processing through that with Lorraine and some other things as well. And Lorraine's response to me was, first off, she goes and basically explains the story and paradigm where basically she shares that these issues that I'm wrestling with Jeremiah aren't issues with Jeremiah. They're internal issues with me.
Of course.
And that the Lord is inviting me in on a refining process, and the Lord is using Jeremiah and the things that he's sharing from the platform to refine these things out of me. Highly confusing, I will just say. And then in conjunction with that, she's like, if you're asking my opinion, I don't think you should quit. I think you need to hang in there, and I think you need to keep going and not forfeit the process of refining that the Lord has you in. So again, large spiritual language. It's almost like everyone walks around with this fear that they're going to miss the call of God in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And because everything is so intensely spiritual, it's very high pressure. So I'm just sitting there and I'm like, well, I guess I just need to keep going because this is a me issue. So I left these meetings feeling horribly confused. This was 4.5 years of me wrestling, and then my wrestle's getting spun on me.
Yeah. Let me just mention, if you're in a 4-year battle, you've left your family, you've left your parents, and nothing's getting better, everything's getting worse, and the advice is don't give up. Sometimes you do need to give up. Sometimes you need to say, you know what, I have hit my head against this wall and the wall's not moving. So maybe I just need to go through that door over there. And also let me mention that, having some experience with the investigation into Mike Bickle and IHOP KC, that was a similar theme. When people would want to leave, all right, you can go, but the breakthrough is right around the corner. People were literally couldn't pay their bills, and they were saying, yeah, but the millionaires are coming. We had a prophecy that the millionaires or the billionaires, the people with the money are coming, and people didn't go to college. People sacrificed learning a skill, and it's certainly a noble thing to give yourself to prayer, but there was a manipulation
100%.
that you would fear that if you left, you were missing God or you were settling for second best. And you know what? The older I get, the more I learn about God is he's a bit more chill than that
Yeah.
he is not stressing out over, oh no, you made the wrong decision. Is God not stronger than that? Is his will, is his ability so weak that, he cares for us. He loves us. So if you're in that type of environment, anybody watching, and people are just telling you, don't leave because you're going to miss God, relax. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And that's kind of like the experience that I was having in two separate occasions as well, where I had known that the Lord was telling me it was time to leave in two separate times, about like a year and a half apart. And both times it was told, like, don't miss the call of God in your life. Like, are you really sure you're hearing from the Lord? Like, just throwing so much doubt into my ability to hear from God on two separate occasions. Right before speaking to it with them, I knew 100% Lord is saying it's time to transition and seek the other things that the Lord I felt like had put on my heart, versus like being construction instead of being there at the church and working at the church.
Yeah.
And so it was really a strong pattern. I have other friends who would say that they had the same pattern happen to them,
Yes.
where it's like you try to transition and do something else that the Lord is telling you to do, and they strongly question your ability to hear from God on that issue and say that you don't want to miss the call of God in your life by
Yes.
leaving.
And even your motives in leaving. There's a strong question to put on your motives. Are you offended? How's your heart with God doing? It's like, and so you just kind of leave and you're like, oh, me and God are great.
Offense excuse or explanation is used quite a bit. Are you offended? Are you picking up somebody else? You don't want to carry somebody else's offense or take up somebody else's offense. I haven't found that scripture in the Bible. I think sometimes we are to take up other people's offense and fight for them, particularly if they're weak and vulnerable and they need someone to give voice to them. So this whole idea of, you've picked up somebody's offense or you're offended, you can look at something and say, that is wrong. I forgive you. I'm not walking in bitterness, but I'm out of here. I'm going to move on. And then that can be twisted to you're offended.
Yeah,
You're not
100%.
forgiving or you're bitter.
Yeah.
definitely.
100%. 100%.
Lorraine Box encourages you not to give up, to press in. This is for your spiritual breakthrough, and you're growing through this, and God's using Jeremiah to build, character in you. But this comes to a head a few months later. What happens? There's this meeting, and you have a extreme physical reaction.
One day I was in a staff meeting and I got triggered. So it felt like an onset of a panic attack. So I'm going to the bathroom like I always, like I usually did. And so I noticed, though, while I was in the bathroom that my muscles were constricting. And so, like, my hands would coil up. They call them like chicken claws. And it scared me. I started losing mobility in my muscles and was really confused as to what was going on. So I'm crying, scared. I walked around the building to get to my office. And then by the time I got to my office, I laid down on the ground because my legs were going weak. Felt like the onset now of a paralysis episode. And I laid on the ground in the fetal position and began to go in and out of large seizures for about an hour and a half by myself in the office.
So this began in a staff meeting, right? And is anybody checking on you?
Yeah, Morgan was texting me. Another staff member was texting me, and I'm able to text them every now and then, back and forth. But I felt really torn internally. Like, I was scared alone and needed help, but for whatever reason, I didn't want any of them to help me. And I couldn't understand why I was feeling that way. I wanted my parents. I wanted my husband, but I didn't want anyone from Altar. I didn't want any staff. That thought alone really scared me, and I didn't quite understand it. So Morgan asked if she can come in and pray for me. And so I said, yeah. So she came in, two of the elders came in, another staff member, and Jeremiah came in. I didn't know that was what was going to happen. And they all come in and they go to start praying. Well, as soon as Jeremiah walks into the door, my seizure went from like a level 5 to like a level 50, just like rapidly escalated. And I didn't know why. Even that scared me. I'm like, what is going on? Morgan gets down and goes to pray for me. I'm like shying away from her putting her hand on me. What I was experiencing physically was so incredibly confusing, but I was in just a horrific amount of pain, a horrific amount of pain. And what I know now is my body was, because my heart and mind couldn't say what I was actually feeling and sensing, my body was forcing me to feel how unsafe I felt underneath the Johnsons' leadership. And that was hard to admit. I wouldn't come to find that out until later on. So this seizure kind of lasts for maybe an hour, maybe less. I can't really remember. No one calls the ambulance. No one calls my parents to let them know.
Me.
And at the time, I didn't know this, but no one called Josiah initially. Didn't end up calling him until later on. And he was 2.5 hours away at a job site. And so my father-in-law and sister-in-law end up, kind of helping me get up and walking me to my car. And I'll never forget this. I was walking out into the concourse, and Jeremiah and a few different staff members were out there, and they were kind of just making jokes. It was like business as usual. As a staff member in the middle of a health crisis, I remember thinking, I'm not safe here. No one is taking this seriously.
Yeah, what is concerning to me is that, from what I understand, the church is experienced in deliverance. At least to them, it must have looked like you were going through some sort of demonic attack. I think what you said makes much more sense, that the doctor explained to you that you couldn't say what you were feeling, which is, you folks aren't safe for me. You've pulled me out of my home, and the more I get closer to you, the worse things get. You couldn't formulate that, so your body is overriding and saying, well, we're gonna react to this situation.
Yeah.
But he did have he did tell you that I guess it was a few years before that he wasn't a big fan of the diagnosis that the doctor had given you, but here in this situation, he had nothing to offer you.
Exactly.
Right.
And that really began to become a pattern, with the demonic torment that I was experiencing. I would bring these demonic encounters to them. I would bring to them my health issues. I guess I can understand from a health context them not knowing how to help me, but I would have these demonic experiences. They would pray over me. And if anything, there would be times where it got worse. I did not receive any form of release or relief from these demonic experiences. And that confused me, because I was like, you talk about demons all the time. Surely you know what I'm experiencing or what I'm going through. And no one could help me. And that was really disheartening and discouraging. I started to feel like I was the problem. Like, man, I'm not in sin actively. Like, I don't understand how, like, this is allowed to keep happening. So, and going back to, my experience, my father-in-law and sister-in-law dropped me off at my apartment. My sister-in-law offered to stay. Maybe my father-in-law offered to stay. I can't quite remember the details, but I didn't want to be alone, but I was actually so incredibly afraid of any leadership at altar. I didn't want anyone there. Because I knew what I was experiencing deep down was highly emotional, and I knew that none of them had emotional bandwidth or capacity to meet me or sit with me in my pain. Because that was my experience. I would share emotional experience after heartache, and not very often was I met right in the middle of my pain. In the heat of my crisis, the very last thing that I wanted was to walk with people who were emotionally disconnected. I'm sorry, but that was my experience.
Yeah.
And so I asked to be left alone, and for the next 3.5 hours, I would go in and out of seizures until my husband could get home. It was incredibly, incredibly devastating and dark. A few days later, Jeremiah and Morgan asked to meet. At this time, right before my meeting with Jeremiah and Morgan, I actually meet with a doctor, and this doctor would go on to, really be a vital piece in my life. And is a very close friend now as well, but we sat down together and basically shared with me. She said, the crisis that you're experiencing right now is a perfect storm in every area of your life, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. This is not something you will recover from in 1 to 2 or even 3 months. She's like, and maybe not even a year. She's like, you need to step down, and honestly even encouraged me to move. She said that what I was going through was so insanely and severely traumatic. And that time I was diagnosed with several different things. One of those things would be, the first thing was PNES. A PNES means psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. It basically occurs when the heart and mind can't fully express the tension or cognitive dissonance that it's experiencing. It forces resolving signals to the motor course part of the brain, and it forces, out of an effort to resolve internal tension, the body responds. So seizures, muscle spasms, paralysis. So the PNES and the ab reactions would really go hand in hand if I was triggered, and if some type of traumatic, emotional, physical, whatever memory was triggered, I would have seizures. And so I was given that diagnosis, seizures, Lyme's disease, stage 4, like one of the most intense forms of Lyme's diagnosis, to the point where the bacteria had infiltrated my brain and compromised my body. And those often came with paralysis episodes. I would wake up some days where from the neck down, I would not be able to move. I would be in so much pain. My husband would have to carry me to the bathroom and help me just go about my day. I was diagnosed with high systemic mold colonization, a medical EMF sensitivity, joint inflammation, and just horrific. I was constantly in horrific pain.
Yeah, and
Wow.
had left at an earlier time, all of these things would have been significantly less intense, possibly also just not happened in the first place if you had stepped down when you had first heard the Lord telling you to step down.
Yeah, so for the folks who are listening and thinking, wow, she's dealing with a lot of sicknesses, but all of these sicknesses, from what I hear you saying, your doctors are telling you it's connected to the emotional environment. Your body's
Yes.
simply reacting, and if you get out of this environment, there's going to be a change.
100%. 100%. And chronic illness always comes out of trauma, severe physical, emotional trauma. Trauma is a breeding ground for all manner of autoimmune and chronic illnesses. So anything that was in my system was just intensifying because of the state of trauma, fight or flight, and stress that my body was in. Which I was warned, by several doctors, if you don't take your health seriously, if you don't take your stress seriously, this is going to get really bad. This is
Yeah.
going to get really bad. And I would tell leaders that.
Always minimized.
And it was, it was minimized. Thank God that Josiah ended up taking a step down.
Hang on real quick. It was always minimized by who?
Leadership. So did Jeremiah Morgan. And I think it's possible that they just honestly didn't understand. They didn't understand, but in the same turn, it probably would have helped if they would have taken the time to understand.
Or at least giving you the space to think that it's okay for you to step down.
Or consult a doctor you've been talking with or somebody about what's going on.
And I actually wanted that. I remember early on, I wanted Jeremiah and Morgan to connect with some of my doctors. The impression that a lot of people at Alter got since, talking was that all of a sudden my health just hit the fan and I just couldn't handle the environment anymore. And it was kind of more so on my body and on my health or whatever. And that's not true. It was a gradual incline and progression, and leadership was aware of it the entire time. So by the time that my body actually hit the fan, it was severe enough that I was given a laundry list of life-altering diagnoses.
And they didn't agree or say that it was right for you to step down until it was literally impossible to go anywhere outside the home, let alone church.
Yeah. I was bedridden for months. I was just in bed. So
now it is like a year ago, less than a year ago.
Yeah.
And you received this diagnosis and you're done. Did you just tell them I'm quitting, or?
Yeah. We met with the Johnsons and they offered us a paid sabbatical for the month of June for me to just kind of reset, heal, figure out what was going on. And I did. And about a week into it, I'm like, we knew my time was up. There was no way.
And we had been talking about you stepping down since you started dating.
Yeah, this was a long conversation coming, honestly. And what's funny is Josiah was more pro me quitting than me. So it actually took me time to get on the same page.
Yeah, there'd be so many talks where I'd try and encourage you to listen to your body, listen to you for your health, and you'd say like, I can't quit. I don't know how.
Yeah, I just felt like I couldn't. I felt trapped. I felt like I couldn't leave. And so I take the sabbatical, and Jeremiah and Morgan actually made a statement in this sabbatical meeting where Jeremiah basically said, me and Morgan have actually been talking in the last little bit, and we were just saying we don't know how much more Mads can take. I didn't respond to that in the meeting. I was pretty mute. Internally, I'm fuming with anger. It's like, what do you mean? Like, I've literally been trying to quit 2 or 3 times now. This is craziness. And so, fast forward, we meet with the Boxes and the Johnsons, and the meeting was, relatively pretty good initially. And so we're Jeremiah's asking, how do you feel like this happened? And I'm sharing. Basically, I shared that I felt like the Lord's asking me to take a step down. And Jeremiah was like, the Lord already shared with us, we know that you're supposed to step down.
The
Large.
Lord shared with them. That was very convenient timing.
Yeah. Yeah. Just still, honestly, because I'm right in the middle of it, I can't really accurately articulate or express what's going on internally. Everything's just so large and loud internally still for me. We
So,
ask,
you know what I would like to, if I could get them in the room with the
yeah,
boxes, I would say, so wait a minute. It wasn't time for her to step down all those other times. She had to just keep pressing in. But now that she's definitely quitting, now the Lord is telling you that there's a whole lot of manipulation going on there. Because if just 6 months ago, the word of the Lord was, you got to press in, you can't give up, you're going to miss out. Why is anything different now that things have gotten worse? If anything, it should be the same advice, but it's not, because it was all off. It was
yeah,
all manipulation. And
yeah, yeah. So we're in this meeting and we're just trying to figure out. Steve and Lorraine end up asking, and me and Josiah, what do you guys need from Jeremiah and Morgan? And I really just shared, we need people to walk with us. We're a few months into marriage, and I was given a life altering, diagnosis, and so Josiah's like part-time caretaker, but also like only source of income. It just was a lot. And so I said, in my mind, and even in saying all of this, I had a relationship with Jeremiah and Morgan. I was really close to their family. Went on babysat their kids. Like went to Morgan's mom's house and babysat. Like there's so much relationship and history and connection there. And so I really made every effort to make this work, honestly, on my end. And so I'm asking them as friends and as leaders, like we really need people to walk with us. Can we at least meet once a month? Morgan's immediate response is, well, how busy our calendar is, and if you can communicate accurately, and intentionally, we'll make sure to put it on the calendar. And Jeremiah just kind of smiles, and Lorraine stands up or doesn't like literally stands up, but sits up and says, "You heard that. So if you don't communicate for yourself, you can't get offended." And I'm sitting there and I'm like, hang on a minute. Like we are in one of the most severe health crises of our life, and you guys are our friends. You're our leaders. We've given up everything to be here. Like
yeah,
literally everything to be here. My family, my relationships, you are all that we have. Like truly. And we need people to walk with us. And this is I felt crazy because it didn't feel like people were bearing witness with the severity of our circumstances. And so it felt like I was making it up. It felt like, no one's saying that, but it feels like I'm making this health stuff up. And I'm like, highly traumatic.
Yeah, and there was they had asked in that meeting, like, why do you think they got this bad? Like, why do you think how did this happen? How did we get to this point? And you had said,
I basically started alluding to the stress of the environment. I was like, the environment's very high pace, the pressure and stress of my job. I'm leading worship for insane amount of services and prayer room and altar global and sometimes altar school. Like I was spread very thin. Um, and so I was being very generous. Like I'm like, I think it could be, contributing to some of the stress and the traumatic different things, compounding trauma that's happened in my time here at altar. And Morgan basically responds and gives me this word. And basically the word is that she believes that the Lord is drawing me into a season of discerning my own discernment. And she's like, and I've had to go through this too. So like I walk into a room and I discern different things. She's like, but I have to be careful that my pain and my experiences aren't filtering what I'm discerning. And she basically was sharing with me that she feels like, she's like, as a leader who's been over you for the last 4 years, I think that this is something that you deal with and that the Lord is trying to work out. And
yeah.
Lorraine
At a
sits up.
certain point, I'm sorry, but at a certain point, they just need to be quiet. I mean, why? Like at the end of everything that you have shared here, she's giving you kind of a rebuke. You're the victim. You're the one who's suffered. You're the one who's been taken from your house, from your family, and it's very frustrating for me to hear the story. So Lorraine says what?
She basically sits up and is like, I agree. I agree. And I'm sitting there, I just feel crazy. I'm like, I guess
Well,
I guess
that is
I,
the definition of being gaslit. Is that somebody is giving you something that's different from reality. You're experiencing reality, and they're just coming up with nonsense.
yep,
100%.
yep.
100%. Yeah. So, moving forward, of course, I'm home. The church took a break in July. We went to the 3rd year anniversary for a little bit at the altar. There was a large amount of mold in the church building, so I really couldn't be there. So initially, the reason why we weren't going to church was obviously because of my health, but two, I couldn't be in the building. Mold would trigger really intense seizures for me. So like even at the 3rd-year anniversary, I was sitting in the front row and started having some pretty bad muscle spasms.
And your doctor told you not to go back in the building.
Yeah, my doctor did tell me. She was like, "Do not."
And we were really hardly going anywhere at the time, let alone
Right.
church. We weren't really going on hardly any dates. We weren't really
Yeah.
hanging out with any friends. Like we were truly like kind of just stuck
Right.
to our apartment because it was so hard for you to really do anything.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
to go around the walk around the neighborhood was
And
challenging.
I think also it's important for us to clarify when Madison now is in this season, some people could possibly think, well, since Madison left the altar, now Dana and Billy as her parents or maybe have been turning their hearts against the altar or against Jeremiah, or we didn't bring up anything.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't even know the magnitude of what was
No.
going on here because we weren't in that kind of communication.
We were just glad to be relating with her
Yeah.
again. The
Yeah.
last thing we were going to do is try to convince her of anything. And
Well,
Yeah.
and we also
Because-
understood PNES. We had done the research and we knew
Yeah.
her nervous system was maxed out. Her bandwidth was very small. So we weren't going to bring up something that was going to be triggering or traumatizing.
And she has not yet left the church in terms of church family. So
Right.
Yeah.
it's difficult to go, but she hasn't said I'm done here yet. So the last thing you would want to do is pick a fight there that could potentially
Yeah, we hadn't had any sort of those conversations in a long time.
Long time.
You guys are always super respectful of like our boundaries in that front. It was just a mute issue we didn't really discuss
We
with
just didn't talk
Yeah.
at
about
that
it.
time.
So on the 4th of July, less than a year ago, something special happens.
Yeah. So Madison is on the 2nd month of her sabbatical. The relationship is rebuilding because they need support. And when they met with us and said what was happening, our question to both of them was, guys, this is big. This is huge. How can we support you? What do you need? And that really began to build a bridge. But on July 4th, we had planned a family cookout. And so Madison and Josiah came. Preston was here with great family day.
Mhm.
And I had heard about Madison's seizures. I had never seen her have one.
Yeah.
But we had gone out to the pool after dinner and she said to me, "Mom, I need to go in and lay down." I said, "Okay." So she came inside and then her brother Preston got out of the pool and I said, "Hey, when you go in, will you check on your sister?" So he did. And he came back out and he said, "Mom, she's asking for you." And I said, "Okay." So I came inside. She was on my bed. And when I opened the door, she was in the middle of having one of these seizures. Hands, curled up, shaking. She's crying. So I just come to her side and I say, "What do you need?" And so you can rub her arms or you can kind of rub her legs just to try to help. Well, her other brother, Mason, comes in. He sees what's happening. And then here comes Billy. And then Josiah must have had realized Madison's not back. And so he gets out of the pool. He comes in there and we're watching her have this seizure. Josiah was so tender and so good to her that our dog is interrupting.
She's been a very good girl for a long time.
Anyway, so Josiah is very tender with her. You can see it calm her, and it was beautiful to watch.
At this point, I'd experienced dozens of seizures with him.
Yeah.
Months.
Yeah. So at that point, though, Madison, once she kind of calms, she says, "Mom and Dad, can Josiah and I talk to you tonight?" And we're like, "Of course." We're not really sure what in the world is coming. So, but we begin to talk and she begins to explain a little more in detail these PNES seizures. She says, "Mom, there's like 3 kinds." And she says, "Some are just physical. Like it hits me and it's just physical. Some, when they hit me, it feels physical and the spiritual element." She said, "But the most painful ones are the ones that come with large emotions and like memories." And she said, for example, I have ones where I feel all this pain, but I see myself as a little girl and I'm looking around and I'm saying, "Where's my mom? Where's my mom? Where's my mom?" And she said, "I'm terrified." Well, she begins weeping Well, I began weeping because I know what she's describing. I've done my research. I know that high control groups shatter a secure attachment between a child and their parents. So she's describing what I know to be true. Ship is still a little tenuous. So I say, may I hug you? And she says, yes. So I get up, I wrap my arms around her, and I just say, I'm here. I'm here. At this point, everybody's crying. And then she says, and Dad, the same thing happens with you. I'm a little girl and I'm looking around. I'm saying, where's my dad? Where's my dad? Where's my dad? And then Billy, we just trade places and he holds her and he says the same thing. That night, she apologized to us for pulling away from us.
Wow.
We apologized to her for not knowing and making things worse when we didn't understand. And it really was the beginning of the healing that we're very grateful for.
Wow. It's, I guess, so sad and beautiful that you had to ask her after now, I guess, several years, can I hug you? Of course, you were able to, and that's the most beautiful part. And just seeing all of you together on the couch is beautiful. This would be a great place to end, but I want to ask, you were told that because Jeremiah and Morgan have pulled you out of your family, and now you're at the end of this process. And they said, well, we will meet with you on a monthly basis if you reach out to us. Did you reach out to them?
Yeah, for about the first 3 months, several conversations or just text back and forth, response times got a little bit further and further. By about the third month, and we didn't meet month 1, didn't meet month 2 or month 3. So by the third month, I just started asking the Lord, I'm like, Lord, are you just not on this? So we just kind of stopped trying. And I was actually shocked at how much peace I felt and was actually grateful, hindsight even now, that we didn't meet because given a text message from Morgan would send me into a 2-hour long seizure. An audio message from Jeremiah would send me into a seizure to the point where my dad, my husband's at work and dad's having to come into my RV and just hold me until the seizure ends, and peel apart my hand, like just the whole process. So my nervous system didn't have the bandwidth or the capacity to see them or be with them.
Wow. So again, I don't want to continue to beat up on Jeremiah, but I am deeply concerned, that there needs to be some accountability here because he did pull you, him and Morgan both, they pulled you out of your home and the entire leadership and went through this horrible process. And then when you're coming out of it, they dropped you. Now it was good for you because you're right. Your body would have a trauma response to them.
Yeah.
But they didn't know that. And the lack of empathy for where your life would take you like once you were out from their inner circle, it would appear that they were done with you. Like he told someone the other day, the people who are leaving, it's getting worse for them. But for us, even though that group's getting smaller and smaller, it's getting better and better, which is what you would say in a high control environment to keep people there. What else would you like to share today, Madison?
Yeah, thank you. So, I'll keep it pretty consolidated, but, I got connected with an amazing doctor about October, started to become a health practitioner in October.
Wow.
And then in November, sorry, I was trying to figure out which month was next. In November, I kind of got to the point where I was facilitating my own detoxes. We met with a labs research Lyme's specialist, like Lyme's and mold specialist. Like I was going and just trying to do as much research as I could because, I had all this time on my hands now to just heal. Yeah, which was the biggest gift, truly. And
You needed it.
I needed it. Yeah. It was long overdue. And so I met with this research doctor, and she basically said, given my symptoms and given my experience, it was going to take me a minimum of 3 years to overcome the seizures, a minimum of 6 years to overcome the Lyme's. And that's if the type of Lyme's that I have is curable, because for a lot of people, Lyme's isn't curable. And then it was going to take me at least 8 years to detox from the amount of mold, because I had 10 plus years of mold toxicity. And so I just got off the phone with the research doctor. That wasn't the doctor that ended up treating me, thank God. And I just cried. I was like, Mom, this can't be my life. We refused to accept that 3, 4, 5, 6 months into marriage, we were looking at the next 10 years of navigating chronic illness. And so I had this vision, and I was in this hole. And I asked the Lord, and I said, Lord, I don't want you to just deliver me from this pit that I'm in. I want you to teach me how to build a ladder to get out. And so I became a health practitioner, and the Lord, without fail, it was so beautiful. Lord literally taught me how to heal mentally, emotionally, physically. I started
Yes.
getting trained. Facilitating my own detoxes, my own healing. Dr. Robin, Dr. Robin Perry Braun was overseeing all of this and was incredible throughout the entire process. I ended up going and doing her program, which is called IBRT, Integrated Bioenergetic Restorative Therapies. And my life completely changed in every way, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. A few months after, I would become seizure free, and I am to this day seizure free. Muscle
Wow.
spasm. I made a list of all of the things that I've healed from, and I want to read because I think it is just so
Sure.
powerful. So seizure and muscle spasm free. I've lost weight. My chronic fatigue's completely gone. My thyroid is healed. My adrenals are healed. My cortisol is regulated for the first time ever in life. The demonic torment I was experiencing was completely gone. I no longer have panic attacks before I go to bed, just in being stressed around what in the world I'm going to experience. Paralysis episodes are gone. Panic attacks are gone. Social anxiety is gone. I sleep all night, which is like, I've never slept like that's such a big deal. I eat whatever I want. That's another big deal. I was on horribly restrictive diets for most of my life, and the debilitating mold sensitivity is gone. Like I feel like I'm like inhabiting my body again. Like I'm not a victim to my sensitivities or to whatever. And so, yeah, I'm almost actually done becoming a licensed practitioner. I actually met with 3 to 4 different health and licensed mental health professionals just to kind of get an understanding, because around December and January, I really wanted to understand what was happening to me because I knew these seizures were directly connected to alter. And the more time I
Right. So
spent, go ahead.
you left the high control environment and your body began to heal.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, that really is the lesson there. I mean, that I could even go further and say, and you're the expert on trauma, not me, but you know, when you left even though you were an adult, you were encouraged to leave your parents' covering. You came under a different covering that was high control, that was intense, that was lots of pressure. Your body's reacting that you come back on because there's the spiritual dimension of just coming back under your parents, even though, of course, now you're married and, you know, you and your husband are one flesh together, but you've made that relationship right with your parents. There's peace and your body. And I guess if there's anything I've gotten out of this thing, I've got a lot out of this interview, but how amazing our bodies are. Like God, that even when we are saying no, 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 our bodies are going to alert us and say, warning, warning, there is danger.
Yes.
It's just how God created this human body is unbelievable. But now you're back with your parents. You've got a great relationship with your husband and you're healing. That's beautiful.
Thank
That's
you.
why I believe that when the scripture says love rejoices in the truth, our body was designed to be honest.
Also think of Joseph, you know, everything he went through was for a purpose. And in the end, you know, he becomes the second most powerful person in the world. And, you know, what you went through, I don't think was God's will. I don't think what Joseph went through was God's will, to be falsely accused of rape, to be sold as a slave, but God worked it out for his good. And, I don't think what you went through was God's will, but God is so awesome, so big,
Yes.
so amazing that
Yeah.
he has worked his will through everything you went through. And now you can be a blessing to other people through what you're learning.
Even as pastors now, to be able to minister to people and recognize different realities of trauma and symptoms of trauma, and being able to be sensitive to that and know now through all this experience, you know, we've had to really learn what to do with
Yeah.
trauma. It's been life changing. So I thank the Lord for that. I'm very grateful for
Yeah.
that.
So Josiah, you know, kind of the irony of all this thing is, you know, what began with Madison being taken from her family, somehow in the middle of that, she develops a relation with you. You guys get married, but your parents are elders and pastors at the altar church. It's a weird irony because now you're in that place where you have to wrestle with your relationship with your parents. And of course, I would never, and certainly am not encouraging you to disown or leave or break relationship with your parents. And that relationship is highly important. But how are you navigating that right now?
Yeah, it's definitely been really challenging. We've had a couple of really hard conversations. Have communicated to them really time and time again. My heart is is for unity in our family. My heart is to be their brother, to be their son, and that like all of this doesn't change our relationship, doesn't change the fact that I love them, and I definitely am not, do have no intention of separating myself from them because of the hardship that we went through. And the things were, I felt like my parents were involved in this process, my dad was involved in this process where I felt hurt or confused, or you felt hurt or confused. We've had really good dialogue about that, and I've totally forgiven him and like released any resentment or pain or frustration to those instances. But at the end of the day, as far as all this goes, I agree that there needs to be accountability, and I believe that there's other people that we know and other people who are still involved who have had similar experiences. And I guess my heart is I feel like it's more important to just speak truth and share truth and encourage others. Like, hey, if you experience similar things, like it's okay to, to think for yourself, to listen to your body, to protect your relationship with your family, with the people who are close to you. And so yeah, that's really where my priorities like lie right now. And at the same time, trying as hard as I can to protect and love on the relationships I have with my family at the same time. Yeah, it's been
Wow.
difficult.
Well, this has been a roller coaster, I feel like, but it has ended in a beautiful place with your healing, with your growth, with really great insight from Josiah about how you're navigating with your own family. I just, we're going to be praying for you. And, there are a lot of people who love you and who have been in touch with me. We came together because of other people, but even today, people have texted me, who just really love you and care for you, Madison, and are just so happy that you're sharing your story. It's going to bless a lot of people.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
happy to do it. Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
So, I've heard a lot of recordings of meetings, and, Jeremiah is constantly concerned that people have not given him a meeting. They have not come to him. And of course, we know that you guys, Billy and Dana, requested a Matthew 18 type meeting or to take it to the next level. And they were not willing. But I can imagine that he's going to watch this video or hear about it and say, well, why didn't they come to me? Why didn't they do Matthew 18? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we did Matthew 18 for 4.5 years. That would just be my short answer. I had ample amounts of meetings with Jeremiah and Morgan, communicating with them different things that hurt me primarily. Honestly, this issue where Jeremiah demonized both my mom and my dad and saying different spirits that they had. I remember sharing that with Jeremiah directly. Morgan was in the room, and Jeremiah's response in apologizing was, "I'm sorry that that's how you felt," which isn't an apology. Is
No,
the bottom.
it's not.
Jake Hill made a beautiful post yesterday. I don't know if you saw it about identifying true repentance. And I read it and I was like, he hit the nail on the head where it's like Jeremiah would apologize for my feelings in the situation or how that could have hurt me or how that could have, affected or how I felt about it. But he never acknowledged when I said that about your parents, that was highly destructive to you as a 21-year-old. And for that, I am truly sorry. He never owned his actions. And he maintained his narrative that my parents were demonic, controlling, and manipulative. So therefore, there was never any true repentance. So we beat Matthew 18 over the head, honestly. And I was so confused as to why it wasn't working. And I had grown up with a household of peacemaking and all of the different things. And so it was just maddening to me why this wasn't working. And we had meetings with the boxes. See, another part of Matthew 18 is, if you go and confront your brother and that doesn't work, and then you bring in 2 witnesses or 2 people from the party. So we did that. Still, no true repentance, no true turning. And so this is where I believe, and me and my husband, honestly, this is where we've landed in all of it and why we have created the distance in communication we have. We believe this is the scripture out of trying to pursue Matthew 18 and that not working. Here's the scripture that we're now standing on. Confront a divisive person once, confront a divisive person twice, and the third time have nothing to do with them. And so we believe that Matthew 18 doesn't really fully apply to people who are consistently abusing people spiritually and manipulating people because there is no true repentance. So therefore, we've created space and do not see that it's appropriate to have any more conversation and dialogue where we will just continue to be gaslit, manipulated. That was actually what I was told by 3 separate licensed mental health professionals, that I was narcissistically abused and spiritually abused. And so that's why we've created such a strong stance and have not communicated directly.
Yeah, I would also add that if Matthew 18, it gives the appearance of two people on equal level. If your brother sins,
Yes.
it is not somebody going to somebody who is above them in authority. And particularly if they have abused them and that your body is having a trauma, fight or flight response to
Yep.
being around them. Certainly not. I just want to share that for anybody listening, that if you're in a situation where people are telling you to go to someone that you are afraid of, who has hurt you, who has tormented you or abused you, no, you would go directly to leadership and warn them of that person. And then in this situation, you have an entire leadership that is, coalescing around each other and protecting each other. So you can't even go to the local elders and report Jeremiah, or you're going to get what we saw a week ago, where the elders get up and basically defend Jeremiah.
Cover it up.
Correct.
Yeah.
Cover up.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I think my only thought in that, and what becomes hard for people who are in the system and who are really trying to just obey leadership and the rules and things like that. For someone who was abused, whether it's physically or sexually, you would never tell the victim of that form of abuse to go and do Matthew 18 with their abuser. That's not how it works. You need a third party who is not involved and can actually protect the victim and advocate for the
Yes.
victim and truly bring the reconciliation and the justice that's needed. And so through our prayer and different things, we believe that this meeting, creating a platform for us to share our story at this point, we believe that the story is for people who have been impacted similarly. We have zero, intentions of trying to convince or accuse or whatever with the Johnsons. We believe at this point it's for the victims who aren't given a chance to speak because they're being blacklisted and silenced.
Amen. Amen. Well, I want to thank you for sitting down with me and sharing this story. I've learned a lot. I think people are going to come away from this better. So God bless you. I'm excited about the future, Madison, for you and Josiah. You're two very mentally healthy people and spiritually strong. And we bless you.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you,
Amen.
Ron.
Thank you so much.